My name is Maren Holloway. I'm 41 years old, and the man my mother married after my father died spent 4 years quietly emptying her retirement account, $312,000, while she made him grilled cheese sandwiches and called him a blessing. The cruelest part isn't the money. The cruelest part is that I am a forensic accountant. I have spent 15 years meeting men like Dale Whitcomb in federal court. I testify against them. I trace their paper trails. I know exactly which line on which statement gives them away. And for almost 2 years, I sat across from him at Sunday dinner and let myself believe I was wrong, because my mother loved him, and because being right would cost her more than being silent. I want to tell you what it cost anyway. I want to tell you what I did the morning I finally stopped pretending. The morning I drove 90 minutes to my mother's kitchen, with a folder under my arm, and watched her push it away across the table, and heard her say the sentence that broke something in me that has not fully healed. She said, "Maren, you're imagining things," and what I did next, they didn't expect it. If this is your first time here, the stories on this channel are about the quiet people who finally stop apologizing. Stay with me. This one is going to take a while. It should. I want you to understand who my mother was before Dale. Linnea Holloway taught second grade in Linden, Ohio for 31 years. She kept a wooden box on her desk, full of buttons her students brought her when they lost them on the playground. She'd sew them back on coats during recess. She was the kind of woman who remembered the names of every child she ever taught and asked about their grandmothers by name 20 years later at the grocery store. She married my father, Thomas, in 1982. He was a structural engineer who could not, for the life of him, change a light bulb without consulting a manual. They were happy in a quiet, unspectacular way. The kind of happy that doesn't make the highlight reel but makes the whole house feel warm. He died of pancreatic cancer when I was 22. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. The last thing he said to me wasn't poetic. He said, "Take care of your mother, not the way she wants, the way she needs." I didn't understand the difference then. I'm still learning it. My mother grieved the way she did everything, with patience and small rituals. She kept his side of the bed made for 2 years. She set 5 plates at Sunday dinner, one for each of us, one for him, one for whoever might wander in, and even after I moved out, even after I came home only on holidays, she set the same 5 plates. The empty one for Dad, the other empty one for me, in case I changed my mind and drove in. I want you to remember those plates. 3 years after my father died, my mother met Dale Whitcomb at a church bereavement group. He had lost his first wife to a stroke. He had one son, Griffin, who was 18 at the time and didn't talk much. Dale told my mother she had the kindest eyes he'd ever seen. He told me the first time we met that I had my father's handshake. He cried when he said it. I believed him. I want to be honest about something here, because if I'm not honest about this part, the rest of the story is a lie. The first Christmas after they married, my car broke down at my dorm 200 miles away. It was sleeting. The roads were closed in 3 counties. I called my mother and told her I wasn't going to make it home. Dale picked up the second line. He drove 4 hours through ice to come get me. He brought a thermos of cocoa. He said, "Your mom would have never slept if I didn't come for you." He drove me home and didn't complain once and didn't make a single comment about how he was missing his own family's dinner. For one whole winter, I believed my mother had been given a second kind man in one lifetime, which is more than most people get. That's the part I keep coming back to. That thermos, that drive, the version of him I thought was real. I have learned slowly that some kindnesses are deposits. People make them early, and then they spend the next 15 years withdrawing on the goodwill, like a savings account they own outright. I just didn't know yet that I was the one with the receipts. For the first 8 or 9 years, I genuinely liked Dale. He was good with my mother. He fixed the gutters. He went to her parent-teacher conferences after she retired and started volunteering as a literacy tutor. Because she liked having him there, he learned to make her tea the way she liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. Stirred counterclockwise because she said it tasted better. The small things he did right made me stop looking for the small things he did wrong. There were warning signs. Of course there were warning signs. I am paid professionally to see warning signs. I just couldn't see them in my own family. The way you can't smell the perfume on yourself after you've been wearing it all day. Around year 10, my mom stopped opening her own mail. Old Dale said her eyes weren't what they used to be. He said it'd be easier if he sorted things and gave her what she needed to sign. She agreed. She has macular degeneration in her right eye, real, diagnosed. But she could read fine with her left. I told myself it was a sweet gesture. I told myself a husband sorting the mail is not a federal crime. Around year 11, he convinced her to consolidate her bank accounts. He said it was simpler. One checking, one savings, one joint. He showed her how confusing the statements were. He sat with her at the kitchen table and helped her sign the forms. She said it was nice to have someone who understood numbers. She had been married to my father, who was an engineer, and to me, who became an accountant, and she said this, with no irony at all, about a man who had never balanced his own checkbook in his life. I dismissed it. I told myself she was tired, that she'd earned the right to let someone else handle the paperwork. Around year 12, Dale gave my mother a Christmas gift she actually cried over. It was a debit card, a joint one, with both their photographs printed on it. She held it up to the light and said it was the sweetest thing anyone had ever done. She said it made her feel like a real wife again, not a widow with a roommate, a wife. I remember sitting on her couch, eating a sugar cookie, watching my mother weep with gratitude over a piece of plastic. I remember thinking, and this is the part I will never quite forgive myself for. I remember thinking, good for her. I want you to know I have been to forensic accounting conferences where keynote speakers describe exactly this kind of gift, this exact kind. The joint debit card given as a romantic gesture to a recently widowed woman by her second husband. The keynote speakers call it the Trojan horse. They put it on slides. I clapped at those slides. I went home, I ate a sugar cookie on my mother's couch, and told myself I was overthinking it. That's the warning sign I think about the most. Not because it was the biggest. Because it was the loudest and I muted it. There was one more. The summer of year 13, my mother had a small medical scare. Nothing serious, a fainting episode at the grocery store. She was put on a low-dose blood pressure medication. When I called to check on her, Dale answered. He said, "We're doing fine, honey. We just thought it'd be best if I held on to her meds and gave them to her in the morning. You know how she forgets." She doesn't forget. My mother has a steel trap memory. She can tell you what every student wore on the first day of school in 1994. I said, "Okay, Dale." I said it because she was on the other line. I said it because the alternative was a fight and I had a flight to catch, and a deposition, and a life. I said okay because saying okay is easier than the truth. If you have ever said okay because the truth was inconvenient, I'm not going to tell you it was your fault. I will tell you this. The people who exploit our families count on us saying okay. They build entire crimes around it. That phrase, "we just thought it'd be best, I want you to hold on to it." It's going to come back. The first hard piece of evidence came on an ordinary Tuesday in October, the 14th, I think, or the 21st. I'd have to check. I was at my office in Columbus, working on a case that had nothing to do with anything. A nursing home administrator who'd been writing checks to himself out of a trust account. Run of the mill. The kind of case I could close in my sleep. My assistant, her name is Petra, buzzed me. She said my mother was online too and sounded upset. I picked up. My mother said, "Maren, sweetheart, the strangest thing. My credit card was declined at the pharmacy." I asked her which card. She said the joint card. The one with the photos. I asked her if she'd been making large purchases. She laughed and said, "Honey, I bought a $4 bottle of allergy pills. There's something wrong with the machine." I told her I'd call the bank. She said, "Oh no, sweetheart, don't bother. Dale's gonna take care of it when he gets home. He always does." I almost hung up. I almost said, "Okay, Mom," I almost let it go. But there is a particular kind of dread that lives in my profession. It's a small, cold feeling at the base of your sternum. It's the feeling that comes when a number doesn't match, when the deposit dates don't align with the payroll cycle, when the same vendor invoice appears twice in the same quarter. It is not a feeling I have ever learned to ignore. I asked my mother, and I tried to make my voice sound casual, like I was asking about the weather. I asked if she'd looked at the joint account recently. She said, "Oh, Dale handles that, honey. I haven't logged in since, gosh, I don't think I've ever logged in. He set up the online banking and he checks it every morning." I made some excuse. I told her I had a meeting. I told her I loved her. I hung up the phone. I sat in my office chair for a long time. I want you to understand what I was sitting with. Not certainty, not yet. Just that cold feeling. The same feeling I'd had at conferences. The same feeling that, in someone else's family, I would have called by its real name in under 30 seconds. It is hard to describe what it is like to feel a professional alarm go off about your own mother. Like being a doctor and noticing your own pulse is wrong. I called my husband Ellis. I told him what was happening. Ellis is a high school music teacher. He has a particular gift for staying quiet on the phone while I work something out in real time. He let me ramble for 10 minutes. Then he said one sentence. He said, "Maren, you'd have flagged this for any client by now." I drove to Linden that Saturday. It was a cold afternoon in October, Saturday, around 1:45. The leaves had all turned, and the wind was coming down off the river in that way it does in Ohio, where it slices right through whatever you're wearing. I'd told my mother I was just stopping by. I brought a coffee cake from the bakery she likes. I parked in the driveway behind Dale's truck, same truck he'd had for 12 years. Same dent in the bumper from the deer he hit in 2017. I let myself in the side door. My mother was at the kitchen counter rolling out pie dough. The radio was on, low, the local AM station that plays old country. She had flour on her left cheek. She looked in that moment like every memory of every Saturday I had ever loved. Dale was at the kitchen table. He looked up, he smiled. He said, "Well, look who decided to grace us, Chief." I smiled back, I sat down. I put the coffee cake on the table. I want to tell you what etiquette I was wearing because I remember it exactly. A gray sweater, wool, the one Ellis bought me for our 7th anniversary. I remember it because I kept rubbing the cuff of the right sleeve between my thumb and forefinger the entire time I was in that kitchen, like I was checking that it was still real. That I was still real. I made small talk for 20 minutes. I asked about the church food pantry. Dale told a long story about a parishioner who'd brought in expired soup. My mother laughed in the right places. She cut the coffee cake. She gave Dale the biggest piece. Then, as casually as I could, I said, "Mom, I was wondering if you could pull up your retirement statement for me. I want to talk to you about something for tax planning. It won't take long." My mother said, "Oh, I don't know how to do that, sweetheart. Dale, can you?" Dale didn't move. He took a sip of coffee. He smiled at me the way you smile at a child who's asked a question they're too young to understand. He said, "Honey, your mom and I have it under control. There's no need to be digging into all of that. It's complicated stuff. We just thought it'd be best to keep things simple." We just thought it'd be best. I felt it. That cold feeling. Right at the base of my sternum, I said very calmly, "Dale, I'd actually like to see it. I'm her daughter and I'm a CPA and it'd help me help her with planning." He looked at my mother. She looked at her pie dough. She did not look at me. He said, "Maren, sweetheart, you don't come around enough to be making decisions about your mother's money. With respect." And there it was. The thing he'd been waiting 15 years to say. The shiv he'd been sharpening since the day I missed a Sunday dinner in 2019 because of a work trip. The thing he'd been collecting like coupons. You don't come around enough. As if presents were the price of standing. As if love were measured in driveway visits. I looked at my mother. I waited. I waited for her to say something. Anything. "Dale, that's not fair. Dale, she's my daughter. Dale, she has every right." She said nothing. She said nothing for what felt like an entire winter. Then she looked up finally and she said, and I will hear this sentence in my head until the day I die. She said, "Maren, honey, Dale's right. You haven't been around, and you've always been a little dramatic about money." I didn't yell, I didn't cry. Every part of me wanted to flip the kitchen table, to take the coffee cake and throw it at the wall, to tell her exactly who her husband was and exactly what I did for a living and exactly which federal statute he was, in my professional opinion, currently violating. I didn't. I picked up my purse. I said, "Okay, Mom." I kissed the top of her head, and I felt her flinch, just slightly, like a child who knows they've done something wrong. I told Dale it was good to see him. I walked out the side door. I sat in my car in the driveway for 9 minutes before I could turn the key. The radio was still on inside. I could hear the old country station through the kitchen window. I could hear my mother laugh at something Dale said, the second the door closed. That was the moment I knew. Not that he was stealing from her. I had suspected that for an hour. The moment I knew was the laugh. The relief in it. The relief of a woman who had been afraid her daughter was about to ruin her marriage, and who was grateful that the daughter had backed down. I drove 90 minutes home in silence. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call Ellis. I sat with the cold feeling into my sternum, and I let it grow. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I had stopped being a daughter. I had become something else, something quieter, something more dangerous. I had become an auditor with a personal interest in the file. I want to tell you what happened next, but I have to tell you what I learned about myself first. I went home that Saturday, and I did not start an investigation. Not for 2 more weeks. I want to be honest about that, because if I tell this story as if I went home and immediately turned into an avenging angel, I'm lying to you, and I owe you better than that. For 2 weeks, I did nothing. I went to work, I closed the nursing home case, I made my husband dinner. I attended a yoga class I had been skipping for 6 months. I sent my mother a polite text on her birthday that said, "Love you, Mom," with no follow-up. She sent me a thumbs-up emoji. That was our entire correspondence for 14 days. I want you to understand the version of me that did nothing for 2 weeks, because she's the version of me I am still slightly ashamed of. She told herself a number of things. She told herself that maybe she'd overreacted, that maybe her mother's "you've always been a little dramatic about money" had a sliver of truth in it, that maybe Dale was just controlling about finances the way some men are, and it didn't necessarily mean what she thought it meant. She told herself, mostly, that if she didn't look, then she wouldn't have to know. There is a particular cowardice in being a professional truth teller who is afraid of the truth in her own house. I've prosecuted men like Dale Whitcomb. I have sat in conference rooms with their wives and told those wives, gently but clearly, what their husbands had done. I had practiced the speech 100 times. I did not want to give that speech to my own mother. The thing that finally moved me was small. It was an email. It came on a Wednesday morning. From the church secretary in Linden, a woman named B. Coyle, who had been the secretary at St. Margaret's since I was in middle school. Bea sends out a monthly newsletter to families who used to be active in the parish. It's mostly birthdays and funeral notices and bake sale announcements. This particular newsletter mentioned, in passing, that the Whitcombs, Dale and Linnea Whitcomb, our beloved parishioners, had generously donated $5,000 to the new church roof fund. I read that sentence 3 times, $5,000. My mother lived on a fixed income, her teaching pension, Social Security, her IRA, which my father had built up over 30 years, and which had not, to my knowledge, been touched in a decade. She did not have $5,000 to give to a church roof fund, not without it being a deliberate, planned decision, the kind she would have told me about. She had not told me. And the donation, according to Bea's newsletter, was being made in memory of Dale's late mother, Doris Whitcomb, who passed in 1998. It was a donation in honor of his mother, from my mother's money. That was the moment my hand stopped shaking. I want you to remember this, because I think it's important. The thing that moved me wasn't the $312,000. I didn't know about the $312,000 yet. The thing that moved me was $5,000 given to a church, in someone else's mother's name, from my mother's account. The sheer, almost casual disrespect of it. I called my colleague Hugo Bramwell at 9:15 the next morning. It's like, Hugo is a forensic accountant who specializes in trusts and estates. He's been my mentor for 12 years. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "Hugo, I need to ask you something hypothetically." He said, "Maren, you don't ask hypothetical questions." "What's going on?" I told him. I told him about Dale, about the mail, about the joint debit card, about the medications, about the donation, about my mother's face in the kitchen, about the sentence. We just thought it'd be best. About my father's voice on the phone 2 days before he died. Hugo listened the whole way through without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Maren, I want you to do something for me. I want you to remember that your father made you co-trustee of your mother's IRA in 2006. Have you remembered that?" I had not remembered that. I had not remembered it because I'd been 22, and I'd been told to sign some papers, and my father had said just in case, and 3 months later, he was dead. I had filed the papers in a box and forgotten about them. Hugo said, "I think we should pull a statement, Maren, quietly, through the proper channel. You have legal standing to do that. You've had it for 20 years. Your stepfather doesn't know that." I want to stop here for a moment, because what happened in the next 60 seconds of that phone call changed everything. If you've ever found out, halfway through a fight, that you were holding a key the other person didn't know existed, drop the word key or the word storm in the comments. Because what I did next isn't what you'd expect. I'll tell you in just a minute. 3 days later, I drove to the regional headquarters of Heritage Federal Credit Union, the institution that held my mother's IRA. I brought my co-trustee paperwork from 2006. I brought my driver's license. I brought a court-certified copy of my father's death certificate. I brought my CPA credentials and my firm's registration. The woman at the front desk was named Ida Mercer. She'd been the branch manager at Heritage for 40 years before she retired, and she'd come back 2 days a week to handle complicated accounts. I didn't know her, but my mother had once mentioned that Ida Mercer was the woman who had walked her through her widow's benefits in 2003 with such kindness that my mother had cried. Ida looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. She had silver hair pinned back. She was wearing a navy blazer. She said, "You're Thomas Holloway's girl." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "I remember your father. He came in here in 2006 and told me he wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened, his wife would have one person looking out for her who knew the difference between a dividend and a deduction." He laughed when he said that. He had a kind laugh. I started to cry. I did not mean to start to cry. I had not cried in 2 weeks. I had not cried in the driveway. I had not cried in the parking lot. I had not cried at the email about the church roof. But I cried in front of Ida Mercer in a navy blazer who remembered my father's laugh. She didn't say anything for a moment. She handed me a tissue from a box on her desk. Then she said very quietly, "Honey, why are you here today?" I told her. The short version. About Dale. About the donation. About the joint account. Ida did not look surprised. She looked tired, in the specific way someone looks when they've watched the same thing happen 1,000 times and never gotten used to it. She said, "I need to look at the account. You have a right to see it. Wait here." She came back 28 minutes later with a folder. The folder contained 4 years of monthly statements from my mother's retirement IRA. I want to tell you what I saw. I want to tell you that the account had been worth $473,000 in October of 2020. My father had built it carefully, conservatively, over 30 years. He'd put in $100 a paycheck for most of his working life, and he'd watched it compound. And he'd been proud of it the way some men are proud of woodworking or vegetable gardens. In October of 2024, the account was worth $161,000. $312,000 had been withdrawn over 46 months, in increments. Some as small as $800, some as large as $14,000. The withdrawals were authorized by signature. The signatures were my mother's, some of them, most of them. A few, and Ida flagged these for me with a soft pencil mark. A few of the signatures were not. She said, "Maren, I'm not a handwriting expert, but I've watched your mother sign her name for 20 years, and those 3 withdrawals are not her signature." I looked at the 3 withdrawals Ida had marked. They totaled $46,000. They had all happened in the last 14 months. The signatures looked like my mother's signatures, the way a copy of a copy of a copy of a photograph looks like the original. I looked at Ida. Ida looked at me. She said, "Honey, what would you like to do?" I sat in that conference room for a very long time. There was a beige paint on the walls and a fake plant in the corner and a clock that ticked too loudly. I sat there and I thought about my mother. I thought about her flinching when I kissed the top of her head. I thought about her laugh through the kitchen window. I thought about her sitting on the couch crying over a debit card with both their faces on it. I thought about what would happen if I did this. If I filed what I was about to file. If I called what I was about to call. My mother would be humiliated. The whole town would know. Dale would deny it. He would tell everyone I'd always been jealous of him. He would tell my grandmother I'd been waiting 15 years for an excuse to break up her marriage. He'd get to her first. He always got to her first. I almost stopped. I want you to know I almost stopped. I sat in that conference room and I took out my phone and I scrolled to my mother's contact. I drafted a text. It said, "Mom, I love you. Forget I asked about the statement. I'll come home for dinner next Sunday." I almost sent it. I deleted it. I drafted it again. I sat there for I don't know how long. Long enough that Ida quietly left the room to give me privacy. What stopped me, in the end, wasn't anger. Anger would come later, in waves, in the middle of meetings I couldn't focus on. What stopped me, in that beige room with the ticking clock, was a memory. My father, sitting on the edge of his hospital bed 2 days before he died. He'd been thin by then, thin enough that the watch on his wrist had slipped down past the bone. He'd said to me, "Take care of your mother, not the way she wants, the way she needs." I had not understood at 22 what the difference was. I understood at 41 the way my mother wanted to be taken care of was for me to leave the folder closed, to kiss her on the head, to eat the pie, to pretend. The way my mother needed to be taken care of was for someone in this world to stop lying to her, even if she begged me to. I put my phone down. I called Ida back into the room. I said, "I'd like to file a fiduciary breach claim. I'd like the bank to open an internal investigation. I'd like the joint account frozen pending review. And I'd like to put a temporary hold on any further withdrawals from the IRA." Ida looked at me for a long moment. She said, "Ma'am." She said it the way you say it to a soldier. "I want to tell you about what happened in the next 48 hours. About the phone call from my mother. About the phone call from Griffin. About the conversation that finally broke me open. About my husband driving 90 minutes in the middle of the night because I called him from a Waffle House parking lot, unable to remember how I'd gotten there. But first, I need to tell you about Dale's son, because I had not, in 18 years of knowing him, ever had a real conversation with Griffin Whitcomb. And what he told me, 3 days after I walked out of Heritage Federal, was the single most important phone call of my adult life. He called me on a Sunday morning, from a number I didn't recognize. He said, "Maren, it's Griffin. Don't hang up." I almost did. He said, "He did it before. I want you to sit with that for a second. He did it before." I sat down. I was in my kitchen. I was in pajamas. I had been about to pour a cup of coffee. The pot was still steaming next to me. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet. I said, "Griffin, tell me everything." He told me everything. He told me that his mother, Dale's first wife, who'd had the stroke, had not in fact died in the financial circumstances Dale always described. She had not been a woman of modest means who'd left him with a small pension. She had been a woman who, before her stroke, had worked for 32 years as a registered nurse at a Catholic hospital. She had built up a substantial retirement. In the 18 months between her stroke and her death, Dale had been her primary caregiver. He had also been the sole signatory on her accounts under a power of attorney. By the time she died, the accounts had been almost entirely depleted. Griffin had been 17. He had not known. By the time he was old enough to ask questions, the trail was cold and his father was on his second wife, who, by all appearances, was being treated with great kindness. Griffin said, "I tried to ask him about it once, when I was 23. He told me I was confused. He told me my mom had spent it all on medical bills. He told me if I brought it up again, he'd cut me off." Griffin said, "I kept my mouth shut for 15 years, Maren. I kept it shut because I didn't have proof, and because Linnea was so happy. And I thought maybe with her, he'd be different. Maybe my mom was just, maybe he'd needed the money for something I didn't know about." I told myself a lot of stories. Griffin said, "I'm telling you now because my fiancé's mother called me 3 weeks ago. She does some kind of consulting. She told me my father had been emailing her about her finances. He'd been telling her she should put my fiancé's name on her accounts so it'd be easier when something happened. He'd been doing it without my knowledge." Griffin said, "I should have called you 10 years ago. I'm sorry." I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, and I cried for the second time in 3 weeks. I cried for Griffin's mother, who I had never met. I cried for my own mother, who was about to find out that the man she had thought was her second chance at love had picked her, in part, because she had a paid-off house and a 30-year IRA. I cried because the worst kind of stories are the ones where you weren't the first victim and won't be the last. And the only thing that breaks the pattern is one person finally refusing to be silent. Griffin said, "What can I do?" I said, "Will you give a statement to the bank?" He said yes. He said it without hesitation. He said it the way you say it when you've been carrying something for 15 years and finally have somewhere to put it down. I made the appointment for Tuesday. What happened on Tuesday, I'm going to in slow motions and because it deserves to be told slowly. Heritage Federal Credit Union has a conference room on the second floor. Beige paint. Fake plant. The ticking clock. Ida Mercer was there. So was a man named Marsh. I think his last name was Holcomb, who was the bank's internal fraud investigator. Hugo Bramwell flew in from Columbus because he wanted to be in the room. My husband Ellis came with me. He sat in the lobby and read a book and did not pretend to be doing anything other than waiting for his wife. Griffin came. He drove 3 hours. He brought a folder of his own. Inside the folder were old bank statements from his mother's account, which he had subpoenaed 2 years prior when he was trying to settle his curiosity, and which he had never had the courage to show anyone. My mother was not invited to this meeting. I want to tell you why. I want to tell you that I had thought about it for 48 hours. I had asked Hugo. I had asked Ida. I had asked Ellis. The answer, every time, was the same. If my mother was in the room, Dale would perform for her. He would cry. He would say the things he'd said to her for 15 years. He would convince her that I was breaking up the marriage out of spite. And she would believe him because she loved him. Because she had built her last 15 years on the belief that he was the man she'd been given to keep her warm. She had to find out from the bank, from documents, from the cold, unfeeling proof of paper, because nothing I could say at her kitchen table would be louder than Dale's voice. This is, I think, the hardest decision I have ever made. I made it anyway. The bank called Dale and asked him to come in. They told him it was a routine review. He came in. He was wearing the flannel, the same one he'd worn for 15 years. He had a Bible in his coat pocket. I could see the corner of it. He looked in every way like a man who had nothing to hide. He walked into the conference room. He saw me. He saw Griffin. He saw Hugo. He saw Ida. His face did something I have only seen in courtrooms. It went still, completely still. Like a man who has just heard the door of a trap click shut behind him and is calculating, in real time, how many lies he has left. Then he smiled. He smiled the smile he'd been smiling for 15 years. He said, "Well, looks like we got ourselves a meeting, Chief. I want you to remember that, Chief." Ida sat down across from him. She opened a folder. She did not look at him. She looked at the folder. She said very calmly, "Mr. Whitcomb, the bank has identified several withdrawals from your wife's retirement account that bear signatures we believe were not made by the account holder. We have opened an internal investigation. Your son, Griffin, has also provided records that suggest a pattern of similarity in a prior account belonging to your first wife, Doris." Dale's face didn't move. He looked at me. He said, "Honey, what is this?" I did not answer. He looked at Griffin. He said, "Griffin, what did they tell you?" Griffin said, and I will never forget this, because Griffin's voice was shaking, but his words were not. Griffin said, "Dad, I gave them Mom's statements." Dale stared at his son. Dale said, "She spent that money on medicine." Griffin said, "She was in hospice for 6 months. The hospice was covered by her insurance." "I have the bills," Dale said, "Son. You don't know what you're talking about," Griffin said. "Dad, I do. I want to tell you that the conversation that followed was dignified. It wasn't." Dale escalated. He yelled. He said I had always been jealous. He said I had never accepted him. He said my mother would back him up. He said this was a witch hunt. He said the bank had no right. He said Griffin was a disappointment. He said Hugo was a stranger and had no business in this room. He said at one point, "You're going to destroy your mother. You know that, right?" I looked at him. I said one sentence. I said it calmly, and I said it so quietly that he had to lean forward to hear it. I said, "Dale, I am the co-trustee." The room went silent. He said, "What?" I said, "I am the co-trustee of my mother's IRA. My father made me co-trustee in 2006. You didn't know. My mother didn't remember. The paperwork has been on file at this institution for 19 years. Ida just confirmed it. I have legal standing to authorize this investigation, to freeze withdrawals, and to require an audit of every transaction in that account for the entire duration of your marriage." His face went pale. I have only seen one other face go that pale, and it was a man in federal court watching the U.S. attorney introduce a piece of evidence he had not known existed. He sat back in his chair. For 1 second, and I am going to be honest with you about this, for 1 second he didn't look like Dale Whitcomb, the thief. He looked like a man who had just realized he had been outmaneuvered by a woman whose intelligence he had spent 15 years underestimating. And he was, for that 1 second, almost impressed. Then the rage came back. He pointed at me. He said, "Your mother will never forgive you." I said, "That's between her and me. Not you and me." He said, "She loves me, Maren." I said, "Then she deserves to know who she's been loving." He stood up. He knocked his chair backward. He walked out of the conference room without another word. Ida watched him go. She didn't blink. She turned to me. She said, "Now we work." My mother called me 40 minutes later. I let it ring. I let it ring 6 times. I let it go to voicemail. I sat in the conference room with Ida and Hugo and Griffin and a folder full of evidence, and I let my mother's call go to voicemail because I knew what she was going to say. and I needed the strength to hear it. I listened to the voicemail in the parking lot. She was crying. She was saying my name over and over. She was saying, Maren, what have you done? Maren, what have you done to us? Maren, he just came home and he's packing a bag. Maren, please pick up. She left 4 more voicemails over the next 2 hours. By the 5th one, she was angry. She was saying I had always been jealous of her happiness. She was saying I had never wanted her to remarry. She was saying I had hated Dale from the beginning and waited until I could find some pretext. By the 6th one, this came at 11:47 that night. I remember because I was in a Waffle House parking lot. By the 6th one, she was begging. She said, Maren, sweetheart, if you have any love for me, any love at all, please call the bank. Please tell them this is a misunderstanding. He says he can fix it. Maren, please. I sat in the Waffle House parking lot. I had driven there from the bank because I could not bring myself to drive home. I had gone inside and ordered coffee. I had not drunk it. I had walked back to my car. I had sat there for 2 hours, listening to my mother's voicemails on repeat, and I had not been able to make myself turn the key. I called Ellis at 11:51. I said, I don't know where I am. He said, where do you think you are? I said, I think I'm in a Waffle House parking lot. But I can't remember how I got here. He said, stay on the phone with me. He drove 90 minutes to find me. He found me at 1:23 in the morning. He pulled up next to my car. He got out. He opened my door. He helped me into his passenger seat. He drove us both home. He did not ask me a single question on the drive. He played a recording of Sibelius on low volume because he knew it was my favorite. He held my hand at every stoplight. When we got home, he made me eat a piece of toast. He put me to bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress and said one thing. He said, you did the right thing, and the right thing is going to feel terrible for a while. Both of those are true. I slept for 9 hours. It was the first full night I had slept in 2 weeks. I want to tell you the rest of what happened, because the resolution is not the kind of resolution people expect. There is no scene where my mother throws herself into my arms and apologizes. There is no scene where Dale goes to prison. The world rarely tidies itself up that neatly. Here is what happened. The bank's investigation took 14 weeks. It confirmed that $312,000 had been withdrawn from my mother's IRA over 46 months. It confirmed that $46,000 of those withdrawals bore signatures that were not my mother's. It confirmed that the joint account had been used to transfer funds to 7 different external accounts, 4 of which were in Dale's name only, and 3 of which were in Griffin's name without Griffin's knowledge. The bank reported the findings to the appropriate state authorities. A civil case was opened. A criminal case was opened simultaneously by the county prosecutor. Dale moved out of my mother's house 10 days after that conference room meeting. He moved into a friend's basement in a town 40 minutes away. He told everyone who would listen that his stepdaughter had falsely accused him out of jealousy. He told the people at St. Margaret's. He told the people at the food pantry. He told the people at the diner. About 3 weeks, my mother told a version of the same story. Then something happened. I did not orchestrate it. I would like to claim I did. I didn't. Pastor Clem Doyle, who had baptized me in 1985 and who had presided at my father's funeral in 2006, Pastor Clem Doyle drove to my mother's house on a Tuesday afternoon. He did not call ahead. He brought a casserole. He sat in her kitchen for 3 hours. I do not know what was said. My mother has never told me, and I have never asked. But Ida Mercer, who knows everyone in Linden, because she has lived there for 53 years, told me later that Pastor Clem had been visited the previous Sunday by a parishioner who had grown up with Dale Whitcomb in a town 2 counties over. The parishioner had told the pastor that Dale's first wife had not died of a stroke complicated by financial decline. She had died of a stroke complicated by being unable to afford her own medications. Because her husband had spent her retirement on a fishing boat, he kept hidden at a marina 40 miles from their home. The pastor had not known this. Almost no one had known this, the pastor told my mother. 3 days after Pastor Clem's visit, my mother called me. It was 7:42 in the evening. I was making dinner. I picked up on the second ring because I did not want to think about it long enough to talk myself out of it. She said, Maren. I said, Mom. She said, I read the statements. I said, I know. She said, I read all of them. I said, I know. She said, Maren, sweetheart, I don't know what to say. I said, you don't have to say anything tonight. She said, I do. She did. She talked for 46 minutes. She did not ask for forgiveness. I will say that because it is the most important thing about that phone call. She did not ask for forgiveness. She told me what she had seen. She told me what she had ignored. She told me about the medications, about the mail, about the joint debit card with their faces on it, which she now wanted to set on fire but couldn't because she was afraid to touch it. She told me she had seen Dale's first wife once in a photograph and had thought, that poor woman. She told me that she had spent 15 years being grateful to a man for picking her up out of grief, and she had not noticed when his hand had moved from her back to her wallet. She said, near the end of the call, "Your father told you to take care of me the way I needed, didn't he?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You did. Even when I begged you not to." I said, "Yes." She said, "I am so sorry, Maren. I did not say it's okay, because it wasn't. It still isn't." I said, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you on Sunday." I drove to Linden the following Sunday. I brought a coffee cake. I parked in the driveway. Dale's truck was gone. The dent in the bumper from the 2017 Deer was no longer something I had to look at. My mother was at the kitchen counter, rolling out pie dough. She had flour on her left cheek. The radio was on, low. She looked up when I came in. She did not smile right away. She looked at me the way you look at someone you have not seen clearly in a long time. The way you look at someone you owe more than you know how to pay. She said, "Come sit, sweetheart." I sat. She made me coffee. She poured me a cup. She did not ask if I wanted any. She remembered how I took it. Black. 1 spoon of sugar, the mug with the chip on the rim that had been my father's. She set 4 plates on the table that afternoon. Not 5. I saw it. She saw me see it. Neither of us said anything. We ate pie and listened to the old country station and did not try to fix anything that could not be fixed in one afternoon. When I left that evening, she walked me to my car. She held the door open. She said, "Maren." I said, "Yes, Mom." She said, "Not 1 cent, 10 years of behavior." I said, "Okay, Mom." I drove home. I did not turn on the radio. I sat with the cold feeling in my sternum, which had become somewhere along the way something warmer. Not warm, not yet, but not cold either. The criminal case is still ongoing. Dale has not been convicted yet. He may not be. The civil case has resulted in a judgment against him for the full $312,000 plus interest, which he does not have because he spent it on a fishing boat at a marina 40 miles away, exactly the way he spent his first wife's retirement. Because some men have only one move and run it until it stops working. Heritage Federal restored $84,000 to my mother's account out of their internal fraud insurance. The rest she will live without. She is 68 years old. She has her teaching pension. She has her Social Security. She has me. We have made a plan together. She will be okay, not the way she would have been, but okay. Griffin and I talk every other Sunday. He's getting married in the spring. He has invited me. I am going. His mother's name will be read at the service because Griffin asked the officiant to include her, and because some absences deserve to be spoken out loud. Ida Summers retired again for the second time last month. She sent me a card. It was a thank you card, which I found both confusing and very Ida. It said, "Your father would be proud of you." I knew he would be. I just wanted to say so. My mother and I have Sunday dinners again. We do not set a plate for my father anymore. We did for 12 years. We don't now. It was her idea, not mine. She said, "I think I've been holding on to something that was making it easier to lose other things." I did not know what to say to that. I still don't. I used to think that loving someone meant protecting them from hard truths. I thought it meant smoothing the edges, holding the casserole, saying, "Okay, Mom." I thought that was love. I know now that love is the willingness to be hated for a little while if the alternative is letting the person you love be destroyed slowly. Love is the cold feeling at the base of your sternum that won't go away no matter how many times you tell it to be quiet. Love is the woman in the navy blazer who hands you a tissue and asks what you'd like to do. Love is the son who calls you on a Sunday morning and says he did it before because he has carried something for 15 years and finally has somewhere to put it down. Love is the husband who drives 90 minutes to a Waffle House parking lot in the middle of the night and asks no questions. Love is not loud. The narrator is never the loudest person in the room. Truth is, if you are the one who always says okay because the truth is inconvenient, I am not going to tell you it is your fault. The people who exploit our families count on us saying okay. They build entire crimes around it. But there will come a day when the cost of saying okay becomes higher than the cost of saying the other thing. There will come a Sunday afternoon in a kitchen with flour on the counter, and a sentence said in front of a stranger, and a laugh through a window after the door closes. There will come a moment when you understand, finally, what your father meant on the edge of his hospital bed, when he was thin enough that his watch had slipped down past the bone. Take care of the people you love, not the way they want, the way they need. Numbers don't lie, the people who love you sometimes do, and both things can be true on the same Sunday afternoon. If you have ever found proof that a family member was hurting someone you love, and that someone refused to believe you, would you act anyway? Or is loyalty to the victim the same as protecting them from the truth they don't want to hear? I genuinely want to know. Because I am still, on certain Tuesdays, not sure I made the right call. Tell me below. I'll read everyone.